It's good to welcome Michael Walsh on this podcast. He is an author of multiple books, his latest being A Rage to Conquer 12 Battles That Changed the Course of Western History. Michael, welcome to the show. How are you?
Thanks very much. I appreciate you having me on.
Yeah, I'd like to begin by asking you, what books do you write and why do you write them?
Well, I've written 20 that have been published. I don't know. It's a good question. I'm sure every writer has a different answer. I just, it's just who I am. I don't really know what I would do otherwise if I didn't write. So I write, and I write
Mhm.
about things that interest me. And mostly I write about things I want to know more about. So, uh, many years ago, I learned from a wonderful writer uh, mentor of mine who said, if you want to become an expert in something, write a book about it, which seemed counterintuitive because you think, well, you have to be the expert before you write the book. But in fact, you become the expert as you write the book because you're so engrossed in it and you have to be willing to spend so much time, years of your life obsessed with whatever it is that you're doing to make it as good as you can make it. So that was very good advice for me, and I recommend it to all young writers.
Okay, that's wonderful advice. I'll be sure to heed that counsel.
Ooh.
Okay, so I'll limit my previous question to this book. Uh, what is this book that you've written, and why did you write it?
Well, I'll show the cover here for our audience. You can see that.
Mhm.
Um, it's a sequel to a book I wrote 4 years ago, which was quite a success for the publisher called Last Stands, which was a book about why men fight when everything is lost, when all is lost. So it occurred to me that an examination of famous last stands or almost last stands, my definition was a little bit elastic, uh, uh, how they changed the world because of the male inability to admit defeat against all odds. It's one of the strongest masculine attributes. You don't see women doing this, and it's one of the great distinctions between men and women, especially in matters of military skill and dedication. Anyway, that book it was very successful, and so the publisher asked for a second book, and that is A Rage to Conquer, which takes a look at 12 battles, about half of which I would say most people have never heard, that really did affect the course of Western history after I pondered this subject for quite a while before I started writing. This book took me about 3 years to write. So there are battles in it that are famous, such as Austerlitz, Napoleon's great masterpiece, tactical masterpiece, and battles that were far more important in the cosmic scheme of things, such as the Milvian Bridge, which was a battle fought outside of Rome by Constantine the Great on his way to unifying the Roman Empire in the early fourth century. So I just thought each one of these was unique and had cultural ramifications in all directions, not simply military. I think it's really important to explain to potential readers that each time, each chapter is a battle, but it's not exclusively about the battle. In fact, very often the battle can be disposed of rather quickly. For example, the Milvian Bridge, which I just mentioned, that battle was over in about a half an hour. So it's everything that led up to it that's important. The battle itself was a little bit, I make the comparison for, especially for Americans and especially for Texans, to the Battle of San Jacinto, which the Texas forces, having been wiped out at the Alamo, uh, destroyed Santa Anna's army in about 15 minutes at the Battle of San Jacinto, and that won independence from Mexico for Texas. So that's that's the span of it. I mean, other battles take days, some. Alexander at Gaugamela was the third encounter he had with the Persian forces under Darius, and the second that Darius had commanded in person, but it was the battle that broke the Persian Empire and allowed Alexander to go all the way to Central Asia, to what's now Pakistan and northern India. So again, I wanted to put each one in context, and then I wanted to treat each one as it's been treated by history. So by historians, by musicians, poets, painters, dramatists, movie makers, uh, composers. Uh, ev ev Battles affect all elements of society. They're not exclusively limited to military events. And as a cultural historian, uh, I'm interested in that aspect of it. So that's what I've done.
Okay. How would you describe, or how did you come up with the book's title, Rage to
Oh,
Conquer?
it's just pretty obvious, I think. It was a little bit of a play on A Rage to Live, the novel, American novel. Uh, uh, it's also A Rage to Live was the title of a double biography of Sir Richard Burton, the explorer, and his wife. I just liked it. I like the sound of it. And so you want to in nonfiction books, you always want to have a catchy title and then an explanatory subtitle. So the subtitle is 12 Battles That Changed the Course of Western History. I'm not dealing with Asian history, not China or Japan or Southeast Asia. That's not my field of study in general, and it hasn't been in either of these two books. There were some battles that I've considered, and there is in my next book, which there will be a third one. I'm going to do the Taiping Rebellion in China, in part because that involved Western forces and Western commanders, most famously General Gordon, who was later killed at Khartoum fighting the Muslims under the Mahdi in the late 19th century. But mostly I stick to Western history.
Okay. So, what do these 12 battles that you've selected? Well, I suppose you could say a little bit about how you selected them, but what do
Mm.
these battles reveal about the nature of war and peace?
Well, that's a big question. How I selected them is writers have the liberty of basically writing whatever they want to write about. So, you start. I was already deep into this whole uh, uh, field of study after Last Stands, and there were some battles that I couldn't include in Last Stands. There were other battles that I wanted to treat at greater length, and they've all found their way into this rather idiosyncratic list. I admit to that. I like to read sometimes the comments when the book is mentioned online, and you generally get like, "What about Gettysburg?" For example. I got that one the other day. Um, Gettysburg was a great battle. It was a big battle. It was an important battle, but it wasn't the dispositive battle of the Civil War, and it wasn't even the most important battle of the Civil War. Uh, And in terms of bloodshed, it was perhaps in total the bloodiest battle of the Civil War. But, on a per capita basis, you could argue Shiloh, which I did write about in Last Stands, although much, much smaller because it was so early in the war, was far more important to the psyche of both the North and the South and the toll it took on the American public. Gettysburg was the defeat of Lee's uh, maneuver to the north, and remember, Grant wasn't even involved in that battle. But once Grant comes into the war is effectively over, and so I didn't choose Gettysburg. So I apologize to all Civil War fans, but Gettysburg is not in this book. Um, each battle changes something fundamental about Western civilization. So, and a battle I chose that no one's ever heard of is Dorylaeum. And Dorylaeum was the first encounter between the First Crusade Christian forces under the various princelings of Europe with the Turks. And they were almost completely routed and defeated. It was a very, very near run thing, as Wellington said of Waterloo. And if the Norman commander, Bohemond of Taranto, had not rallied his forces and exerted such a strong leadership role, the First Crusade would have ended right there in far western Anatolia, and that would have been the end of it. And all of history subsequently, the entire Middle East situation today, for example, would have been different. So um, that's what interested me about that battle, and I wanted to write about General Patton, for example. And what interested me about Patton was the Battle of the Bulge, and the fact that the Battle of the Bulge was fought in almost exactly the same spot as in World War One when Patton was involved in the Battle of Saint Mihiel, which was the first time the American forces fought as a unit in overseas ever. Uh, so I try to link these up thematically as well. It comes together as you go, and you obviously cut lots and lots of stuff, and you decide you want to write a chapter about uh, pick a battle, and it just somehow doesn't fit into the overall structure or thesis of the book. So, with regrets, you have to leave a lot on the cutting room floor in any business you're in, and like this.
Right. Just to follow up on the bigger question, what do these battles reveal about the nature of war and peace?
Well, I don't know that they reveal anything that we wouldn't expect otherwise. I mean, all these battles form a kind of pattern. In many cases, I will say, for example, that when Caesar is at Alesia and he's got the Gauls surrounded, but he's also surrounded by Gauls, it's kind of like a concentric circle. Uh, he manages to defeat a much larger force by concentrating the bulk of the Romans on one particular spot in the Celtic lines and break through and then demoralizing the Celts, who, like almost everybody the Romans fought, and later on the Turks and the Islamic armies 1,000 years later, that by breaking through the line you demoralize them and they run. So I was able to compare what Caesar did at Alesia when he finally defeats the Gauls. The Gallic Wars more or less come to an end. Uh, with what Beaumont does at Antioch when he breaks through a much larger Muslim force and puts such a fear of them that they scatter and run. And many of the more mobile uh, hit and run, excuse me, forces or tactics. The Turks fought in a way like the American Indians against the Western settlers. They hit and run in and out on horseback. Bowmen, they didn't want to engage physically if they could stay at a arrow's distance away from their enemy. And it was how did you learn to counteract that tactic that Western armies have always had to face. So as I say, I don't think there are any larger lessons that I kind of made those in Last Stands, which is uh, which is why some men just won't give up and will fight to the very, very end for principle, for God, for country, for their wives and children, for lots of reasons like that. But the point of both these books is it's a very masculine arena, and to feminize it is to weaken it. And so I've made this argument in both books that I don't think that women should be in the military except in a rear echelon support category, and that putting them in the front lines, which the Americans have done, is foolish. But that is obviously up for much debate.
Hmm. Yeah, I'm sure we're not going to have this debate right now, but do elaborate more on your position that war is an inherently masculine activity.
Well, you don't see women fighting. They don't organize themselves into large units. More is mechanized. I think every guy knows that if you take a group of, oh, let's pick, you know, oh, 12, 11 people like a football team, the men will. even if they're total strangers, will organize themselves into a unit almost immediately if they have a tactical goal. So, you got how many movies have been written about this? A whole bunch of guys, they're suddenly faced with something. They don't know each other, but they break down into leadership positions, role play, adjective. They almost naturally do this. Women will never ever do that. They'll because they I'm a great fan of the author Camille Paglia, the philosopher. So I think she's right about the nature of feminine sensibility is that women are more biologically and correctly focused on self-preservation and preservation of their children and future children. And they tend to be more competitive about leadership and less amenable to being bossed around. And men don't like being bossed around, but they understand that it's in a military situation, it's critical that you have to follow the chain of command. I just think it puts up the difference between the sexes in a very vivid way.
So in the first chapter, you mentioned Karl von Clausewitz.
Yeah.
So what have we failed to learn from him as either military or civilians?
Well, I think the main point I made in that book is that his most famous line has been mistranslated, and so I think we've misunderstood Clausewitz. Uh, it's come down to us as saying that basically that war is politics or policy uh, by other means, but actually what he said is with other means, and there's a big difference in my opinion. If you say it's by other means, it sounds like you're saying that you only go to war when literally everything else has failed. So that you've tried politics, you've tried diplomacy, and nothing worked, and now you've tried war. And Clausewitz never said that and doesn't mean that. He says that war is a policy tool. So it's fighting, it involves bloodshed and killing, but it is simply a means of policy. His point is, and he says this, and I use this as one of the opening quotes in the book. Uh, War itself is very simple, but everything about war is complicated. And that's the truth. So he also makes the point that there is no logical limit once war starts. There's no logical limit to the amount of force that you can use. That is to say, he's actually saying every war could go nuclear. There's no logical reason why it wouldn't, except that you'll kill everybody or that you have the moral stance against that sort of mass destruction, or. But he asks us to take a very unemotional and dispassionate view of what this tool is. Because as I mentioned, war drives scientific advances, it drives technology, it drives relationships among groups of people, whether it's racial or sexual or national. Um, it moves the ball, even as it destroys, it moves the ball forward on some levels. On other levels, it is highly destructive. I think World War I was the death of 19th century Europe, and Europe has never recovered, literally, because so many of its best men were killed in that war, pointlessly, in retrospect. So that was a huge failure. But you see the advances in technology that come from weaponry. People say, I don't like guns, but if you didn't have guns, for example, this is for Americans, you wouldn't have baseball bats, you wouldn't have typewriters, you wouldn't have a lot of things that involved fine woodwork and fine metal. Uh, you would have clocks, the kind of clocks that developed. All of these uh, highly sophisticated 19th century technologies derived from the armaments industry. So it's hypocritical. I live in Connecticut. That's where I am at the moment. For a state that really made its fortune on two things, guns and whaling, to be against guns and whaling, which we are now because we're more enlightened here in New England than we used to be.
So I'm reminded of that line that Orson Welles says in The Third Man of how Italy was a nation that experienced a lot of wars, and their fruits of the world is the Renaissance and great art and great music and such. And Switzerland was a very much a pacifist nation, and their contribution to the world is a cuckoo clock. So
It's
I
a
wonder
cuckoo
to what
clock.
extent is
Yes,
he correct?
it's a crack, and of course the Swiss are the hedgehog of Europe because, uh, as you know, every Swiss man is armed and must be by law, and how they store the guns and how they control the supply of weapons has changed over the years. But um, Switzerland, as everyone notices, stayed out of World War II because no one wanted to attack them. And the same was true of America after Pearl Harbor. Uh, some of the Japanese who had been here, Admiral Yamamoto had gone to Harvard, for example, who he was the architect of the attack on Pearl Harbor, which is where I grew up, by the way, right at Pearl Harbor. So I looked at it every day as a young high school kid. Uh, they said you don't want to invade America because behind every tree there will be an American with a gun shooting at you, and that has also kept America safe. This is speaking of movie lines. There's a line in Casablanca where Major Strasser is talking to Rick and about how the Nazis are going to invade everyone, and Rick says there's certain neighborhoods in New York City I would advise you not to invade, Major. And of course that gets a big laugh every time because he's talking about Gangsterland and Brooklyn and places like that. Uh, but the Swiss, yeah, it's not entirely true that all they've done is this coup. I mean, they gave us Rousseau. That's both that's good and bad, and they gave us Calvin, uh, the Protestant reformer. Uh, but they were quite fearsome warriors, and there's a reason that the Swiss Guard is the Swiss Guard. The Vatican used them as created them because they were the best fighting soldiers in Europe, and they saved the Pope's life famously during the sack of Rome in the 16th century, which is a battle I mentioned in Last Dance.
Well, I should mention that I'm Catholic, so
Yeah.
Calvin is a major obstacle to challenge.
Yeah, well, me too. I'm Irish, so
So, how can past wars inform us about present wars? I'm thinking about Ukraine and Israel
yeah.
and some other places.
Well, that's a good question. I think we're on the verge. We're definitely on the verge of new technology. Uh, every 400 or 500 years, some black swan genius shows up. And in Renaissance Europe, it was Leonardo da Vinci, and now it's Elon Musk, who uh, has such a broad overview of everything in the culture. Remember, Leonardo literally could do anything. He's a scientist, he's a poet, he's a philosopher, he's an artist, he's everything. Musk is very similar to that because he has a big vision, but he knows uh, as he's busy trying to get us all to move to Mars, which is what he clearly wants to do. He understands that battlefield technology has changed. We're into drone warfare now, and drone warfare could lead to the elimination of actual men on the battlefield. Could. I don't know. It's as Yogi Berra or some American sage like him once said, predictions are tough, especially about the future. So I don't know is the answer. But I think battlefield equations have changed. The Russians are somewhat bogged down in the Ukraine. This whole Russian-Ukraine thing is clearly uh, topic A. Are you in Europe right now?
Yes, yeah, Budapest, Hungary.
Yeah, you're in Budapest. Okay, so the war is taking place not very far from you, actually. And yet it's not really like in the news all the time. Talking about it is in the news. We don't see battlefield footage. We don't see where are all the war correspondents? I haven't seen one of them at that war. In fact, if you just went by what you've seen of it, it doesn't even exist as far as the media is concerned. So that's odd. The Russians don't have the manpower they did during World War II. Obviously, that's what enabled them to uh, crush the Wehrmacht, stop them at Stalingrad, and turn around and crush them. Uh, they have, I think, limited strategic objectives. Because going back to Clausewitz, if they really wanted to finish this war, they'd use tactical nukes on the Ukrainians, and that would be the end of them. So they don't. And there's a reason why they don't. And that is because, in my view, Putin is essentially recapturing and reclaiming elements of not the USSR, but Russia, Mother Russia, the Rodina, as the Russians say. And Ukraine has always been a province of Russia. It's constantly referred to throughout War and Peace, for example, or the Russian nobility who have these vast estates in the Ukraine. It has a relationship, those two places with each other, that we Westerners don't understand. So I think it's really important to keep that in mind when you're analyzing what Putin is doing. And all I have to say about Putin is I first encountered him by reputation when I was in East Germany in 1985 in Dresden, and when he had just arrived from Moscow to do whatever it was he was doing in the German Democratic Republic. I spent the years between 1985 and 91 going in and out of East Germany and the Soviet Union mostly, and then later on Poland and Hungary and Czechoslovakia. And so I had a first front row seat. I was in Berlin when the wall came down, and I was in Russia when Chernobyl exploded. So it's an area of great interest to me, and I think it's been misperceived by most Western commentators who are not sure what they're looking at. And what we are looking at is the kinetic end of the Cold War. These are unresolved issues that didn't get sorted out in 1991, and they will be sorted out one way or the other.
What about Israel?
Israel is not my area of expertise. I did treat the Holy Land in the two battles that took place during the First Crusade, but I think it's such a complex issue that it's just not beyond it's beyond the scope of this conversation.
Okay. Right. So finally, who are your target audience for this book and why so?
Well, I it's funny about target audiences. You don't really most writers don't don't think about their audience. I have an audience who tends to follow me on whatever subject I'm interested in. So you have that group of people who like the way you write or like the way you think, and they'll read you about, for example, I get letters from people all the time saying, "You're not going to make us listen to opera again, are you?" Because there's a lot of times I'll drag opera into a discussion of military history or something. And I'll say, yeah, if it interests me, I want it to interest you too, and that if I'm a good enough writer, I can make you interested in literally anything I want to talk to you about. On the other hand, there's certainly a big audience for military history books. I've been very fortunate that my friend Victor Davis Hansen, who's eminent military historian, encouraged me greatly to write Last Dance when I first came up with that idea and asked him about it, and has endorsed both of these books. So the military history audience is another one, and I think just uh, men and the women who love men. That's my target audience.
Okay. I'm sure they'll find the book to be a delightful read.
I
Thank
hope
you very
so.
much, Michael,
Yeah.
for being on the show.
Thank you. Appreciate it.